Imagine this. It's early 2026, and the Middle East, a region that's always simmering with tension, just erupts. The long-running shadow war between global powers and regional rivals explodes into a full-scale, hot conflict. It's a war that pulls in everyone and shakes the entire world to its core. So today, we're going to break down exactly how it all went down, who the key players were, and most importantly, what it means for all of us.
So where does this all kick off? Well, it starts with an absolutely massive show of force. In the first couple of months of 2026, the U.S. moved its largest military force into the Middle East in over 20 years, not since the Iraq War. And images like this one, of a full carrier strike group cutting through the Arabian Sea, were sending a very clear message. Now, the official line was all about regional stabilization, but anyone who's been watching the region knew what this looked like. This kind of buildup, this wasn't just posturing. This felt like the final move on the chessboard before the game begins. And then it happened. The moment everyone was dreading. On February 28th, all that military hardware was put to use. In a tightly coordinated operation, American and Israeli forces launched a huge wave of strikes against targets deep inside Iran. This was it, the official start of what the world would come to know as the 2026 Iran War. So, the big question is, right, how on earth did we get here? A full-scale attack like this doesn't just happen out of the blue. There's always a backstory. So let's rewind a little and trace the incredibly rapid chain of events that led right to the brink and then pushed us over the edge. When you look at the timeline, it's just stunning how quickly this all went down. It really kicks into high gear in late January with that U.S. military buildup. Just a few weeks later, Iran's supreme leader is on the world stage openly threatening to sink American warships. The war of words was getting hotter by the day. But now it was backed by serious military muscle. And then, bam, just 10 days after that threat, the first missiles hit. We're talking about a crisis that went from 0 to 100, spiraling into a full-blown war in just a matter of weeks. Okay, so what was the official reason given for all of this? The U.S. essentially laid out three main justifications. First, and this is the one that's been around for years, was Iran's nuclear program, which was seen as getting dangerously close to the finish line. Second, you had massive anti-government protests that were sweeping across Iran, creating a ton of internal chaos. And third, tied to that, was the Iranian government's absolutely brutal crackdown on those protesters, which reportedly killed thousands of people. So you had this perfect storm of factors that the U.S. and its allies pointed to and said, we have to act.
All right, so the war is on. And at this point, the world's focus snaps from the why to the what. What exactly got hit in those opening salvos? What were the targets of this massive, decisive first strike? So the initial strikes, man, they were designed to be a knockout punch. They went after key naval and air bases, cratering runways and smashing hangars. They hit the command and control centers for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which is really the ideological heart of Iran's military. But the biggest hit, the one that shocked everyone, was aimed right at the top. The strikes killed Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. This wasn't just a military strike. This was a decapitation strike, designed to throw the entire Iranian regime into absolute chaos. And of course, there's the immediate human cost. We're talking over 200 confirmed fatalities just in that first wave of attacks. And that number includes both military personnel and, tragically, civilians who were just caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But here's the thing, and this is where the story takes a fascinating turn. While the world was glued to their screens watching this unfold in February 2026, the real first chapter of this conflict had already been written. It happened months earlier, mostly in secret, and it had a completely different set of targets. It was a covert conflict, later known as the 12-Day War. Way back in June of 2025, the U.S. and Israel had already launched a series of strikes. But these weren't about hitting conventional military bases. No, this operation had one single, laser-focused goal: to physically destroy Iran's nuclear program. It was a direct assault on the country's most valuable, most heavily guarded strategic asset. And just look at this. The damage was absolutely devastating. On the left, you've got satellite images of the Natanz nuclear facility, a centerpiece of Iran's uranium enrichment efforts. And on the right, well, you can see for yourself. Widespread destruction. This was the result of a very precise, very powerful air campaign, designed to set Iran's nuclear clock back by years, if not decades.
And get this, not even their most protected site was safe. We're talking about the Fordow facility, which is literally built deep inside a mountain to protect it from attack. But as you can see from these images, even that wasn't enough. The US used these incredible weapons called bunker busters, bombs designed to smash through rock and concrete before they explode. The strike was so powerful, it basically took the entire facility offline, sending a clear message. There was nowhere for Iran's nuclear program to hide. So, with its leadership shattered and its military infrastructure in flames, what does Iran do? It doesn't just retreat, no way. It lashes out. And it doesn't just fire back at the US and Israel, it activates its entire web of allies across the region, instantly turning this fight into a massive regional inferno. Iran's retaliation was a multi-front affair. They essentially hit a big red button that activated their whole network of proxy forces, what's often called the axis of resistance. Suddenly, Hezbollah in Lebanon starts firing rockets into northern Israel. The Houthis in Yemen ramp up their attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Militias in Iraq start mobilizing and threatening U.S. bases there, and all the while, Iran itself is launching its own ballistic missiles at Israel and at American bases across the Gulf. The whole region was now on fire. You know, a war in the Middle East is never just a regional war. It always has global consequences. And this one sent immediate and powerful shockwaves through the entire world economy, all because it threatened one of the planet's most critical arteries.
And it really all boils down to this one number, 20%. 1/5 of all the oil that could ship by sea on this planet has to pass through one tiny, narrow choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. And with a war now raging all around it, that vital waterway was effectively slammed shut. So what happens when the Strait of Hormuz closes? It's a logistical nightmare, a complete domino effect. First, all the major shipping lines just stop sending their vessels through. So then, ships have to be rerouted all the way around Africa. That adds up to 20 days to a single voyage. And more time means more fuel. Over $1 million more in fuel costs for every single trip. The impact on the global supply chain was immediate and catastrophic. And the pain wasn't just for oil tankers. Look at the ripple effects across the board. Ocean freight is taking weeks longer, as we said, but look at air cargo. With so many flight paths disrupted, capacity just vanished, and freight rates went through the roof. A 400% spike almost overnight. For anything time-sensitive like electronics or medical supplies, it was a disaster. The entire global supply chain was basically having a heart attack. Okay, so beyond the explosions and the economic chaos, this war forced Iran to look in the mirror. It triggered this profound internal crisis, forcing the regime to reevaluate everything it stood for and how it was going to survive. This quote from the Iram Center, a think tank that watches the region closely, really says it all. This wasn't just a military loss for Iran. It was a moment that forced them to do a far-reaching reassessment of, well, everything. Their politics, their society, and their entire strategy for dealing with the world. So what did that change actually look like? Well, for decades, Iran's whole game was projecting power through that network of proxies, exporting their revolutionary ideology. But the war showed them, in a very brutal and public way, the limits of that strategy. In the aftermath, the leadership pivoted. They shifted their focus inward, moving toward a more nationalist, self-reliant defense policy. The new goal wasn't to export a revolution anymore. It was simply to protect the nation itself. And that leaves us here, with this massive, unsettling question hanging in the air. We've just walked through a regional war that crippled global trade, saw direct conflict between major military powers, and totally rewrote the rules in the Middle East. The fear at the time, as documented in the sources, was that this was something more than just another regional flare-up. And the question we have to ponder is, was the 2026 Iran war the final, terrifying prelude to a third and truly global war?